There is a Russian billionaire so powerful, so untouchable, that even Vladimir Putin, the man who has ruled Russia with an iron grip for over 2 decades, cannot control him. We're talking about Vladimir Putin, with a staggering net worth of more than $24 billion. This man is Putin's Achilles heel. Let me break down why. The oligarch too rich for Putin to control. You've heard of powerful men like Elon Musk, Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump, but one name that often slips under the radar is Vladimir Putin. This man is so powerful that he controls Norilsk Nickel, the world's largest producer of nickel and palladium, and bankrolls billion-dollar resorts like Rosa Khutor in Sochi. In Russia, his influence stretches from metals to media, making him one of the few men even Putin struggles to control. One reason he's so elusive is his staggering wealth and the way he flaunts it. Take his travel habits, for example. Putin doesn't just own yachts, he owns floating cities, vessels worth more than some countries' annual budgets. When you have that kind of money, political control becomes negotiable, and Putin has mastered this game better than any oligarch alive today. Let's start with his crown jewel, the super yacht Nirvana. This is an 88.5-meter monument to absolute financial freedom, worth approximately $300 million. To put that in perspective, that's more money than the entire GDP of some small nations. The Nirvana isn't just transportation. It's a statement of independence that floats on international waters beyond the reach of any single government's jurisdiction. Picture this massive vessel cutting through the waves of the Mediterranean or anchored in the pristine waters off Dubai. The Nirvana features 6 complete decks, each one more luxurious than most people's entire homes. These decks are connected by a glass elevator that rises through the heart of the yacht like a crystal spine, allowing Putin to move between levels of his floating empire with the ease of pressing a button. The yacht accommodates 12 guests in absolute luxury, but more importantly, it houses a crew of 27 professionals whose sole purpose is maintaining this aquatic palace. But the real genius of the Nirvana lies in its strategic design. There's an onboard aquarium where exotic fish swim in their own private ocean within an ocean. There's a pool where Putin can swim while watching the actual ocean stretch endlessly around him. And then, there's the 10-foot deep plunge pool, an aquatic sanctuary where one can contemplate the vastness of wealth and power, while literally being surrounded by water on all sides. The helipad on top means Putin can arrive and depart without ever setting foot on land controlled by any government. The Nirvana reaches a maximum speed of 20 knots and cruises comfortably at 14 knots. These aren't just numbers. They represent freedom of movement across international waters. When you can travel at 20 knots across open ocean, you're not just moving through space. You're moving through jurisdictions, through legal systems, through the reach of any single authority. Currently moored in Dubai, the Nirvana sits in waters where international maritime law provides a complex web of protections for those who understand how to navigate them. But Putin's maritime empire doesn't end with the Nirvana. His yacht Barbara, an 89-meter floating fortress delivered in 2017, represents another level of aquatic independence. Once listed for sale at €165 million, Barbara accommodates 12 guests and serves as a backup palace should the Nirvana ever be unavailable. Having multiple super yachts isn't just luxury, it's strategic redundancy. If one vessel faces restrictions in certain waters, another can provide the same level of mobile sovereignty. The story of Anastasia, now renamed Wheels, reveals the calculated nature of Putin's maritime investments. Originally a 76-meter super yacht delivered in 2008 and named after his daughter Anastasia, accommodated 12 guests in 6 cabins with a crew of 20. But here's where Putin's business acumen shines through his personal life. He made this vessel available for charter at about $700,000 per week. Even his personal luxury items were generating income streams that could fund small nations' annual budgets. When Putin sold Anastasia in 2018 for around $70 million to Ralph Schmid, he was demonstrating something crucial about the relationship between extreme wealth and political independence. The yacht was initially listed at €125 million in 2012, and even after taking what appears to be a loss, Putin walked away with enough money to fund entire political campaigns in most countries. This isn't just selling a yacht, this is liquidating assets in a way that maintains maximum flexibility and minimum exposure to any single jurisdiction's control. Perhaps most intriguing is the story of Launchpad, the 119-meter super yacht originally commissioned for Putin but never delivered due to sanctions. This project, also known as Project 1010, was completed in 2022 and later acquired by Mark Zuckerberg for about $300 million. The fact that sanctions could prevent Putin from taking delivery of this vessel shows both the limits and the workarounds of extreme wealth. While he couldn't receive the yacht, someone else could buy it for the same price, suggesting that wealth of this magnitude finds ways to flow around political obstacles like water flowing around rocks. Now let's ascend from the seas to the skies, where Potanin's collection of Gulfstream jets represents another dimension of his independence from ground-based political control. These aren't just private planes, they're aerial sanctuaries that can cross continents and oceans, carrying their passengers through international airspace where the jurisdictions below become merely theoretical concerns. His Gulfstream G650, with registration RA 11005, previously OE Luke, is valued at around $60 million. This long-range business jet seats up to 19 passengers and is equipped for ultra-long-haul flights that can cross multiple time zones and hemispheres without refueling. Flight tracking records show this aircraft traveling from Russia to locations like Bishkek, Istanbul and Belarus, a pattern that reveals the geographic scope of Potanin's business empire and personal freedom of movement. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Potanin has publicly denied ownership of these jets, yet evidence from aviation databases contradicts this denial. This contradiction isn't an oversight, it's strategy. By maintaining legal distance from direct ownership while retaining practical access through companies like Interos or Global Jet Austria, Potanin demonstrates how extreme wealth can create layers of separation between the beneficial user and the legal owner. His Gulfstream G550 with registration OELPN was sold and re-registered as N107AL, then made available for charter with a list price of about $60 million. This aircraft seats 12 to 19 passengers and represents another example of how Potanin's personal assets can be transformed into income-generating businesses. Even when he's not using a jet, it's working to generate revenue that further increases his independence from any single source of income or political favor. Another Gulfstream G550, registration OEIPE, valued at around $60 million, sits ready as part of his aerial fleet. And yet another G550, registration OE Loke, built in 2013, seats 12 and carries a value of $60 million while being linked to Interos. This isn't just a collection of private jets. This is an air force of civilian aircraft that can operate across international airspace with the kind of flexibility that traditional military or government aircraft cannot match. The strategic brilliance of maintaining multiple jets registered in different countries through various companies becomes clear when you consider the geopolitical events these aircraft have navigated. Flight records show trips to Turkey, Azerbaijan, and other destinations during periods of international tension. When you have assets registered in Austria, Russia, and other jurisdictions, when sanctions target one registration system, others remain available. These jets have been used during what the research describes as geopolitical events, a diplomatic way of saying that while governments clash and impose restrictions, Potanin's aerial fleet continues operating across international boundaries. This is the practical application of extreme wealth. The ability to maintain mobility and options when political situations restrict the movement of ordinary citizens or even ordinary billionaires. While Potanin's yachts and jets provide him with mobility and international reach, his real estate empire and cultural investments create something even more powerful: immovable wealth that transcends political boundaries and establishes permanent footholds across multiple continents. The Fortress Empire: real estate, art, and untouchable wealth. This isn't just about owning expensive properties. This is about creating an empire of assets that cannot be easily seized, relocated, or controlled by any single authority. The scope of Potanin's real estate holdings reads like a catalogue of the world's most exclusive addresses, though much of this empire remains shrouded in the kind of privacy that only extreme wealth can afford. Court documents from his 2014 divorce proceedings with his ex-wife Natalia Potanina revealed glimpses of a portfolio worth billions, with his luxury real estate in Russia alone valued at approximately $150 million. But this figure represents just the tip of an iceberg that extends far below the surface of public knowledge. Within Russia, Potanin retained a high-end apartment in Moscow after his divorce, while his ex-wife received 3 plots of land in the Moscow region valued at $6.8 million combined. This division reveals the calculated nature of his asset management. Even in divorce proceedings that could have exposed his full wealth, Potanin managed to retain the most valuable and strategically important properties, while satisfying legal obligations with assets that, while worth millions, represented only a fraction of his total holdings. But the true genius of Potanin's real estate strategy becomes apparent when examining his international properties. Reports suggest holdings in London, New York, Moscow, and the south of France, a geographic distribution that mirrors the world's major financial and cultural capitals. While specific addresses remain unconfirmed, the pattern reveals sophisticated asset allocation across multiple jurisdictions, currencies, and legal systems. The rumored $90 million home in New York represents more than just luxury living space. Property ownership in Manhattan provides access to one of the world's most stable legal systems, a currency that serves as the global reserve standard, and a location that sits at the heart of international finance. When you own a $90 million property in New York, you're not just buying real estate. You're buying a stake in the American legal system's protection of property rights. Office spaces, hotel properties in Moscow, land in central Russia, and a country club in the Moscow region create a domestic base of operations that generates income while providing social and political influence within Russia itself. These properties serve dual purposes. They're investments that appreciate and generate revenue, but they're also symbols of Potanin's commitment to Russia that help maintain his standing with domestic political authorities. The rumored luxury holdings in Monaco deserve special attention because Monaco represents something unique in the world of extreme wealth management. Monaco's tax laws, banking privacy protections, and geopolitical neutrality make it a favorite location for those seeking to maintain wealth outside the reach of their home governments. If Potanin does indeed hold properties in Monaco, these assets would exist in a jurisdiction specifically designed to protect the privacy and wealth of international billionaires. But Potanin's most audacious real estate investment reveals how extreme wealth can reshape entire regions and create new realities. His $2.5 billion stake in the Rosa Khutor ski resort in Sochi represents nation-level investment in infrastructure that was developed specifically for the 2014 Olympics. This isn't just owning property, this is creating property where none existed before, building entire communities and economic ecosystems from nothing. Rosa Khutor includes luxury accommodations and infrastructure that can host international events, accommodate thousands of visitors, and generate revenue streams that operate independently of traditional business cycles. When you invest $2.5 billion in creating a world-class resort, you're not just building a business, you're building a legacy that will operate for generations, regardless of political changes in any single country. The story of Rosa Khutor also reveals the personal relationship between Potanin and Putin, but in a way that demonstrates Potanin's independence rather than his subservience. The investment was inspired by a 2003 skiing outing with Putin in Austria, but Potanin's decision to invest over $2 billion of his own money shows that their relationship operates on terms of mutual benefit rather than simple command and obedience. Moving from real estate to cultural investments, Potanin's art collections and cultural philanthropy create another layer of wealth that exists beyond the reach of traditional political control. His donations of significant artworks to institutions like the Centre Pompidou in Paris in 2016, channeled through his foundation, demonstrate how cultural philanthropy can create international goodwill while establishing permanent cultural legacies. The 2016 donation of over 250 artworks to France's National Museum of Modern Art represents a transaction worth tens of millions of dollars, but more importantly, it creates permanent cultural connections between Potanin and French cultural institutions. When your artwork hangs in the Centre Pompidou, you become part of France's cultural heritage, in a way that transcends temporary political disagreements between governments. Potanin's funding of exhibitions at the Guggenheim Museum, where he served as a trustee until 2022, created similar cultural connections within the United States. These relationships aren't just philanthropic gestures, they're investments in cultural soft power that create networks of influence and goodwill that operate independently of government-to-government relationships. His role as chairman of the Board of Trustees of the State Hermitage Museum since 2003 represents something even more strategic. The Hermitage is one of the world's premier cultural institutions, and Potanin's support for expansions like the Grand Hermitage Project and art acquisitions establishes him as a guardian of Russian cultural heritage. This position provides cultural authority that complements his economic power and creates additional layers of influence within Russian society. The Foundation's Museum Without Borders program extends cultural influence across geographic and political boundaries. When you're supporting cultural programs that operate internationally, you're creating relationships and networks that exist somewhat apart from traditional diplomatic channels. Cultural exchange continues even when political relationships become strained. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Potanin's facilitation of a 1 billion ruble donation to support the non-profit sector demonstrated the scale of resources he can mobilize for for public purposes. This wasn't just charity. It was a demonstration that his wealth operates at levels where he can single-handedly address national-level challenges. When one person can donate 1 billion rubles to address a national crisis, that person's relationship with political authority becomes one of partnership rather than simple subordination. The art collections themselves, while their specific contents remain largely private, represent wealth stored in forms that appreciate over time while providing cultural and social benefits. Great artworks increase in value, can be loaned to museums for exhibitions that generate cultural influence, and can be donated for tax benefits while maintaining cultural legacy. This is wealth management that operates across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Potanin's cultural investments create what economists call soft power, influence that operates through attraction and cultural connection rather than coercion or economic pressure. When your foundation supports cultural programs across multiple countries, when your donations hang in major museums, when you chair the boards of cultural institutions, you create networks of relationships and influence that exist independently of your business interests or political connections. This cultural soft power becomes particularly valuable when dealing with political authorities because it creates alternative sources of legitimacy and influence. A businessman who is only a businessman can be controlled through business regulations and economic pressure, but a cultural patron who supports national institutions and international cultural exchange occupies a more complex position in society that is harder to reduce to simple economic or political terms. When wealth speaks louder than politics. The true measure of Potanin's independence from Putin's control isn't found in his luxury possessions alone, but in how those possessions have enabled him to survive and thrive while openly challenging Kremlin policies. This is where the rubber meets the road, where we see how extreme wealth can create space for political independence, even within Russia's increasingly authoritarian system. The most dramatic example occurred in March 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when Potanin did something that would have been unthinkable for most Russian oligarchs. He publicly criticized Vladimir Putin's government policies. In a Telegram post that reverberated through Russian political circles, Potanin warned that Kremlin proposals to seize or nationalize assets of foreign companies exiting Russia would revert the country back to 1917. This wasn't just a business disagreement. This was a fundamental challenge to Putin's economic strategy during wartime. Potanin characterized the proposed asset seizures as a form of theft that could harm Russia's economy more than sanctions themselves. He argued that such actions would erode global investor trust for decades, directly contradicting Putin's narrative that Russia could weather Western economic pressure through internal solidarity and state control. The historical reference to 1917 carries profound significance in Russian political discourse. 1917 was the year of the Russian Revolution, when the Tsarist system collapsed and private property was abolished in favor of state control. By invoking this date, Potanin was essentially arguing that Putin's policies would undo the economic progress Russia had made since the end of the Soviet Union. This is the kind of criticism that has landed other oligarchs in exile, prison, or worse. But Potanin didn't stop there. He also advocated for easing foreign currency restrictions to avoid defaulting on Russia's external debt, directly opposing government policies designed to maintain currency controls during wartime. While he framed his comments as constructive advice rather than outright opposition, the substance of his recommendations ran counter to key elements of the Kremlin's economic strategy. The remarkable aspect of this episode isn't just that Potanin criticized Putin's policies, it's that he faced no apparent domestic repercussions for doing so. While other oligarchs who criticized the war more broadly, such as Oleg Tinkov, faced severe consequences, Potanin continued expanding his financial empire, including bank acquisitions, without facing US or EU sanctions as of 2022. This immunity from retaliation reveals the practical limits of political control when confronted with extreme wealth strategically deployed across multiple jurisdictions and asset classes. Potanin's yachts operate in international waters, his jets fly through international airspace, his real estate spans multiple countries, and his cultural investments create international relationships that would complicate any attempt at simple punishment. But Potanin's ability to challenge Putin isn't just about having assets beyond Russia's borders. It's about having made himself indispensable to Russia's economy in ways that make him more valuable as an ally than as an enemy. As the key stakeholder in Norilsk nickel, Potanin controls one of Russia's most important export industries, producing essential metals metals like palladium, nickel, platinum, and copper that contribute significantly to Russia's prominence in international commodities markets. Norilsk Nickel, with 17% of its shares held by international investors, serves as a crucial bridge between Russia and the global economy. The company's adoption of international best practices for efficiency and investor appeal makes it one of Russia's few major corporations that maintains credibility in international markets even during periods of geopolitical tension. This economic importance creates a complex dynamic where Putin needs Potanin's expertise and international connections more than Potanin needs Putin's political protection. When you control assets that generate significant export revenue for the Russian state, your relationship with political authority becomes one of mutual dependence rather than simple subordination. The environmental dimension of this relationship reveals another layer of Potanin's strategic positioning. Putin has repeatedly pressured Potanin to address pollution issues in the Norilsk region, with Putin publicly stating in 2010 that resolving ecological problems there must be one of the company's leadership's main tasks. During a January 2017 meeting, Potanin committed to investing $17 billion over 7 years to modernize operations and reduce emissions by 75% by 2023. This massive environmental investment demonstrates how Potanin can turn political pressure into business opportunities. The $17 billion commitment wasn't just compliance with government demands, it was a massive infrastructure modernization program that would increase efficiency, reduce costs, and improve the company's international reputation. By 2017, the company had already achieved a 30 to 35% reduction in emissions in the Norilsk area, showing that Potanin could deliver on his environmental commitments while strengthening his business position. The genius of this approach is that it transforms potential political weakness into business strength. Instead of simply resisting environmental regulations, Potanin embraced them as opportunities for modernization that would make his companies more competitive and valuable. This is wealth management that turns political pressure into profit. Potanin's international recognition provides another layer of protection from domestic political control. His receipt of French distinctions, including the Legion of Honor in 2017 and Officer of the Order of Arts and Letters in 2007, creates formal relationships with French cultural and political institutions. When you hold official honors from major Western governments, those relationships create diplomatic considerations that complicate any attempt at persecution. His role as a former trustee of the Guggenheim Museum created similar relationships within American cultural circles. These connections don't provide formal diplomatic immunity, but they create networks of influence and concern that extend beyond pure business relationships. Cultural and philanthropic relationships create stakeholders in your well-being who operate through channels that exist independently of government-to-government relations. The contrast between Potanin's situation and that of other Russian oligarchs reveals the effectiveness of his strategic approach. While oligarchs like Boris Berezovsky died in exile and others have faced various forms of persecution, Potanin continues operating his business empire while maintaining his Russian base of operations and his international freedom of movement. His joining of the Giving Pledge represents perhaps the most sophisticated element of his protective strategy. By committing to donate the majority of his wealth to charitable causes, Potanin creates moral and cultural authority that extends beyond his business success. Philanthropic commitments create stakeholder communities that include beneficiaries of charitable programs, cultural institutions that receive support, and international philanthropic networks that have invested in his success as a force for social good. The 1 billion ruble donation during the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't just charity. It was a demonstration that Potanin's resources could address national-level challenges more effectively than many government programs. When private philanthropy can mobilize resources at the scale of government agencies, the philanthropist's relationship with political authority becomes one of potential partnership rather than simple subordination. Throughout this complex relationship with Putin, Potanin has maintained what can be described as strategic loyalty, supporting the Russian state while preserving his independence to disagree on specific policies. His criticism of asset nationalization was framed as concern for Russia's long-term economic interests rather than personal grievances. This approach allows him to maintain his position within Russia while preserving his ability to influence policy discussions. The result is a relationship where Putin cannot simply control Potanin because Potanin has created multiple sources of value, influence and protection that extend beyond any single political relationship. His wealth isn't just money, it's a complex system of international assets, cultural relationships, economic importance, and philanthropic authority that creates space for independence even within an authoritarian system. This independence isn't absolute. No individual, regardless of wealth, can completely escape the influence of their home government, but Potanin has created sufficient complexity, international connection, and strategic value that his relationship with Putin operates more like a negotiation between sovereign entities than a simple hierarchy of command and obedience. The ultimate proof of this independence lies not in any single dramatic gesture, but in the simple fact that Potanin continues operating across international boundaries while maintaining his Russian base, continues expanding his business empire while occasionally criticizing government policies, and continues enjoying his collection of super yachts and private jets while navigating the complex waters of international sanctions and geopolitical tension. This is what extreme wealth can accomplish when deployed with strategic sophistication. It creates space for independence that exists somewhat apart from traditional political hierarchies, allowing those who possess it to maintain relationships with political authority based on mutual benefit and strategic calculation rather than simple command and obedience. In Vladimir Potanin's case, this wealth-enabled independence has created a unique position in Russian society, that of the oligarch who even Putin cannot fully control. If you enjoyed this video, click on any other of the cards on your screen for more content.